Villain checks 1. The Devil Emperor. Where am I? With furrowed brows, he muttered to himself in confusion. His confusion was reflected on his face. The room in which he found himself was a magnificent display of medieval grandeur. It exuded an air of luxury and intimidation at the same time, with its imposing architecture and grandiose furnishings. The walls were lined with torches, casting flickering shadows across the darkly colored stone surfaces. The throne at the far end of the room loomed ominously, a symbol of power and authority. In the center of the chamber stood a throne of unparalleled beauty and craftsmanship. The chair was a towering testament to the wealth and power of the realm's rulers. Made from the finest materials and adorned with precious gems, as he moved his view around the room, his confusion only deepened. He couldn't help but feel intimidated by the imposing nature of the chamber, and he knew that he was treading on dangerous ground. "Didn't I just come from the training ground?" he muttered to himself, his voice echoing faintly in the empty space. He turned in a slow circle, taking in his surroundings once more. "Why am I here?" He felt a growing sense of unease. The room gave him the impression that he would soon face the last boss. But that was impossible, wasn't it? He had just started playing and had only just passed the training ground, filled with other new players like him. The only achievement he had was a perfect score in the training simulation. Feeling a surge of excitement and anticipation, he decided to explore his surroundings and see if he could find any other players. He took a few tentative steps forward, his eyes scanning the darkness for any signs of life. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing through the empty chamber. "Is anyone here?" But there was no answer, no sign that anyone else was present in this mysterious boss room. The only sounds were the crackling of the torches and the faint hum of the virtual reality system. Undeterred, he continued to explore, his footsteps echoing through the vast, empty chamber. As he walked, he couldn't help but feel a sense of anxious. Where were the other players? Why was he the only one here? Had something gone wrong with the virtual reality game? He called out again, his voice ringing out through the room. "Hello? Can anyone hear me?" But once again, there was no answer. This was weird since he'd seen the game demos, yet he couldn't recall anything like this. He stumbled to a stop in front of the ornate mirror, his eyes widening in shock as he caught a glimpse of his reflection. "What?" he muttered, his voice filled with disbelief and confusion. As he approached the mirror, he realized something was not right. His character had changed, but how was that possible? Although his face was still the same, a dark-haired man with striking red eyes, the equipment he wore was definitely not something a new player should have. And why did he have horns, of all things? Moving down, he couldn't help but be awestruck by the sight before him. The clothing he wore was unlike anything he had ever seen before. It was rich, luxurious, and fit for a king. His jaw dropped in amazement as he took in the intricate embroidery and shimmering jewels that adorned the fabric. But at the same time, he couldn't help but be confused by what he was seeing. How had he acquired this equipment? Was it some sort of bonus for completing the training ground? Or had he stumbled upon a hidden cache of treasures somewhere in the game? Without hesitation, he opened his status, eager to see if he could make sense of what was happening. As the menu appeared before him, he couldn't help but be impressed by the array of stats and abilities that were listed. Naimem, Azazel, Trace, Demon, Diclice, Tier 1 Demon Spawn, Chade, 1 Bot, 200, PAA2, 120, 15 Look 10, Waz, 12, Vite, 20, 10. Skills. Demonic Aura LV1. Consume 5 DP, emit a menacing aura that increases the user's attack and defense by 5% and decreases enemies' attack and defense by 5% within a 7-meter radius for 10 seconds per level for 15 minutes. Soul Siphon LV1. Consume 2 deep. The Devil Emperor can drain the life force from his enemies to restore his own health and mana. The Demonic Claw LV1. Consume 5 D peaks, increases the Devil Emperor's physical damage by 5% for 15 minutes. Causes the Devil Emperor's attacks to ignore 10% of the target's physical defense. Has a 20% chance to inflict the demonic weakness debuff on the target for 5 seconds. Shadow Walk LV1. Consume 5 D peaked. The Devil Emperor gains mastery over the darkness, allowing him to teleport short distances through shadows and conceal himself from enemies. Demonic Lance LV1. Consume 5 DP. The Devil Emperor summons powerful demonic lances and charges toward the target, dealing massive damage upon impact. In normal battles, the skill summons 5 lances, while in events, it summons 10 lances at once to wreak havoc upon the enemy forces. The lances are made of dark energy and can penetrate even the toughest armor. Lance number will increase, depend on the level. Talents. Fly LV Max. Consume 2 DPS. The Devil Emperor could fly using his wings. Luck of the Devil. Passive. The Devil Emperor's infernal heritage grants him a supernatural ability to a higher chance of critical hits, dodging enemy attacks, and finding rare loot. Savage Reanimation, war event only, gives the Devil Emperor the power to resurrect fallen monsters that he has defeated before. The power and numbers of the reanimated monsters depend on their original strength. Cooldown 5 minutes. Summon Mini-Boss, war event only, gives the Devil Emperor the power to bring the mini-boss back to life as his loyal soldier. The power and numbers of the reanimated monsters depend on their original strength. Cooldown 5 minutes. Diamond's Disguise, LV1, consume 5 DPs. The Devil Emperor uses his demonic powers to disguise himself as a human or other humanoid creature, allowing him to blend in among the masses undetected. Dark Portal LV1, consume 5 DPs. Dark Portal is a powerful summoning spell that creates a portal to Cursed Crypts, the Netherworld. Mini-Boss Pact LV1, consume 5 DP, allows the player to make a pact with Mini-Boss by defeating it to gain access to summon them in the event. Additional attributes. Please insert your unique additional request. Devil Emperor? He half screamed, the words tumbling out of his mouth before he could stop them. Luckily, he lived alone in his small apartment, so there was no one around to hear him. Villain Cheech 2. A good material for my novel. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Other than the name he had filled in at the start of the game, everything was different. The equipment, the stats, the skills, and even the race itself. It was as if he had been transformed into a completely different character. A powerful and dangerous entity with a reputation that preceded him. For a few moments, he was silent, lost in thought as he tried to make sense of what was happening. He looked around the throne chamber, but there was no one there. No other players, no NPCs, nothing but the flickering torches and the opulent furnishings that surrounded him. Is this a demo? He wondered aloud, his voice filled with uncertainty. The Devil Emperor's background story. It was possible, he realized. Maybe the game developer had created a short story at the beginning of the game, detailing the reasons why the main villain was so obsessed with destroying this world and killing the players. Perhaps it was an emotional scene that provided hints and clues that players could use to defeat him one day. With that guess in mind, he started exploring the place. His eyes were fixed on the status screen in front of him, his mind whirring with possibilities. As he scrolled through the menu, he couldn't help but notice the additional attributes that were still empty. A thrill of excitement coursed through his veins as he realized that he could fill them with whatever he wanted. I can fill anything right, he thought as he walked through the corridor of the place, which resembled the Demon King's palace. He couldn't help but marvel at the intricate details. The walls were adorned with elaborate carvings, and the floors were made of a shimmering black stone. A mischievous smirk appeared on his lips. Since I haven't had a girlfriend in a while, and I need good material to write my novel, I will have some fun then, he muttered under his breath. He was a gamer, yes, but he was also an online writer. His stories were mostly erotica harem, and they sold well. Unfortunately, despite his readers' assumptions that he had slept with a lot of women, well, this was only a demo, and he was pretty sure it would have no effect on his character. With a wave of his hand, the virtual keyboard appeared in front of him. The keys were a vibrant blue color, and each one glowed with a soft light as he touched them. His fingers flew across the keyboard, typing out a command that would change everything. With each keystroke, he felt a sense of excitement building within him. The letters appeared on the hologram screen in a sleek, futuristic font. They were large and bold, making it easy for him to see what he was typing, even as he walked through the game world. The Devil Emperor and his wives have to do lewd things to get additional status. Attributes, buff, he typed, a grin spreading across his face. It was a completely random command, but his harem smut author's brain couldn't help but think in terms of erotic scenarios. As he stared at the words on the screen, his mind began to wander. He imagined the Devil Emperor and his wives all gathered together in a grand palace, engaged in all manner of lewd activities. The thought was both exciting and exhilarating, but he wasn't done yet. He wanted to push the limits, to see just how far he could take this. With a wicked grin, he began to type again. And they can use the intercourse to fully fill their HP, DP, he added, his fingers flying across the virtual keyboard. It was a bold command, one that would change the game world in ways he couldn't even imagine. As he read over his words, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This was exactly the kind of content his readers craved, and now he had the power to bring it to life. At least for him. With a quick click of the Enter key, he watched as his commands took effect. The game world flickered for a moment, and then it was done. An announcement suddenly appeared in front of him. Chavel Emperor's request is in progress. Huh? This is for real, he muttered in shock, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had never experienced anything like this before, and the implications of it were staggering. As he stood there, frozen in place, another announcement appeared on the screen. It was short and to the point. Request granted. Huh. He couldn't help but let out a stupid sound due to his confusion. It was like a dream come true, but he couldn't quite believe it. For a few moments, he just stood there, staring at the words on the screen. He felt a sense of excitement building within him, but also a creeping sense of fear. What had he done? Maybe it's because this is just the demo, he guessed, his voice barely above a whisper. It was all he could think of to rationalize what had just happened. He continued to walk and looked around in awe. Several demon guards stood around him, their red eyes glowing in the dim light. They towered over him, their muscular bodies covered in thick black armor. A thrill of excitement boiled inside of him. It was like nothing he had ever experienced before. The graphics were so realistic that it felt like he was truly standing in the presence of these demonic beings. In curiosity, he reached out and clicked on one of the demon guards. Instantly, it turned to face him, bowing deeply. Demon Emperor, I am honored by your presence. Your power is legendary, and your dominion over the demon world is absolute. How may I serve you? The demon guard spoke in a deep rumbling voice before returning to his position. So cool, he muttered under his breath. It was his first time experiencing what it felt like to be a royal, and he couldn't help but revel in the feeling of power and authority. He continued looking around and met some other NPCs. But none of the NPCs had any sign that they had quests for him or clues where he should go, nor monsters he should kill, so he decided to explore. He was sure he would trigger something soon. Then he stopped in front of a room and decided to open it. This room looks different from the others, so it was definitely related to the game. Once he entered the room, his eyes widened once he saw a beautiful succubus. Villain Shach 3, his succubus. Her appearance was nothing short of breathtaking. Long flowing locks of vibrant purple cascaded down her back, a stark contrast to the darkness of the black horns protruding from her forehead. Her demon wings spread wide behind her, but it was her face that truly captured his attention. Beautiful beyond compare, with high cheekbones, full lips, and a sharp jawline that exuded confidence and strength. Her eyes, a piercing shade of crimson red, seemed to glow with an otherworldly intensity as they fixed upon him. She was on all fours, a look of surprise crossing her face. It was then that he noticed her outfit, revealing just enough to tantalize the senses and leave little to the imagination. He couldn't resist the urge to glance up at the name floating above her head. Lilith. His heart skipped a beat as he read the words, his mind racing with excitement. For real, he screamed in joy internally, the thrill of the moment almost too much to bear. His jaw almost dropped in disbelief, but somehow he managed to maintain his composure. He didn't expect the game to enter his request so easily. On top of that, a succubus? It was a good start. The Emperor? Lilith spoke, her voice tinged with surprise. Huh. He was momentarily taken aback by the sound of her voice. It was more alive than any other in the game before, as if the succubus herself had taken on a physical form within the game. He wondered if the game developer had used a real voice actress to bring Lilith to life, or if it was simply a testament to the incredible level of detail that had gone into the game's design. Well, maybe the succubus played an important role in this game. He took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. A confident smirk appeared on his lips as he approached the succubus with elegant, purposeful step. Even though this was just a demo, he had decided to give it his all. Yes, it's me, my dear, he said smoothly, his voice oozing with confidence as he stopped near her and held out his hand in greeting. He watched as Lilith regarded him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion, her crimson eyes piercing him with their intense gaze. He could feel the weight of her scrutiny, the sense that she was sizing him up, testing him to see if he was worthy of her attention. "What are you doing here?" he said confidently, trying to sound as if he belonged in this world of demons and magic. Lilith looked at his hand, her expression unreadable as she considered his words. For a moment, he thought it was because of his connection. "Is my connection unstable?" he thought. He had checked his ping before going online and had no problems. So this was weird. But then she took his hand and spoke, her voice tinged with a hint of amusement. "Of course I'm waiting for you, my emperor," she purred, her voice low and seductive, standing up. "I've been waiting for you all night." He had expected her to be aloof and dismissive, but instead, she was pressing herself against him, her body warm and inviting as she ran her hands over his chest in a tantalizing caress. His heart was beating faster and faster, the thrill of the moment coursing through him. "Really?" he said once again, his voice tinged with excitement and anticipation. She replied with a soft hum, her voice as sweet as honey. "You said that you would accompany me last night, but you never showed up," she cooed, her lips brushing against his ear in a tantalizing whisper. Since the game didn't have any pre-written responses for this kind of situation, he decided to improvise, to let his creative mind run wild, and come up with a response that would keep the succubus interested and engaged. "I'm sorry, my dear," he said smoothly, his voice dripping with confidence and charm. "I had a lot of business to attend to last night. Mortals can be such a bother, always getting in the way and thinking they're stronger than they really are. But I made sure to put them in their place, to show them who's really in charge," he added, his words flowing easily as he wove a tale of intrigue and power. That's nice speech, he was proud of himself. Thanks to his profession as an online novelist, he had the ability to make the script on the spot for nonsense situations like this. "As expected of His Majesty," she said with a soft giggle, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "But now that you're here, shall we continue where we left off?" He felt a thrill of excitement coursing through him as she pressed her body against his once again, her hands roaming over his chest and down to his waist. Her form was graceful and sinuous, her movements fluid and hypnotic. She moved with an effortless sensuality that left him breathless, a true embodiment of the very essence of temptation. As soon as Lilith finished speaking, she gracefully led him to the luxurious bed in the center of the room. The sheets were made of the finest silk, and the pillows were plump and inviting. She sat down on the bed, positioning herself so that she was leaning back. She beckoned him to come closer with her delicate finger. "Come here, my emperor," she said in a sultry tone. "You should fulfill your promise last night," she said again. A frown on her forehead clearly showed what she wanted from him. "Okay," he said confidently. He walked towards her, and as he got closer, he could see her outfit in more detail. Her clothes were tight and revealing, emphasizing her curves in all the right places. Once he was near the bed, an announcement appeared before him. The words on the screen caught him off guard. "Villain, Chage 4. Take control." "Ah, that's why we need an Ide to play this game," he thought. As the game title implied, it was not just a casual game for everyone. It was reserved for adults only. He remembered the warnings in the game's description: gore and adult content. Most players assumed it was due to the game's gruesome scenes, which were evident in the bloody trailer. But it was more than that. Apart from promising an unprecedented level of realism and interactivity, this game was unlike any other he had ever played. This was the first game where the character would have a wound effect and bleeding like in the real world, rather than just an announcement of damage points. The device had many sensors to ensure the player could feel the thrill in all their gaming experiences. That's why the device was expensive compared to any other gaming devices. Also, the VR headset had a retina identification feature, ensuring only authorized individuals could play. It was a foolproof system, making it almost impossible for anyone to enter the game under false pretenses. This feature was implemented to ensure the safety of players and to prevent any unlawful behavior. Yes, he chose, but the game feature didn't answer him right away. Instead, he needed to wait a couple of seconds before another announcement popped up. Lilith gives you permission to do lewd acts on her. You can do lewd act. Huh, so an NPC can refuse the player? He assumed by the announcement, completely ignoring the delay, and thought it was because of his connection, the game glitch, or too many users. It was bizarre, but he decided to brush it off and continue playing. As he lay beside her, Lilith chuckled softly, her eyes roaming over his body. Relax. I won't bite. Unless you want me to. He couldn't help but laugh at her playful remark, feeling a bit more at ease. I don't know what to say, he admitted, feeling a surge of desire coursing through him. Lilith brought herself even closer until her body was almost touching his. You don't have to say anything, she whispered, her breath warm against his skin. Just let me show you. And then she kissed him, her lips soft and sweet, like ripe fruit. He responded eagerly, his hands reaching out to touch her. She was so warm and smooth under his fingertips, like silk and honey and everything good. She pulled away from him, a sly smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Do you want to see more? She asked, her voice low and husky. He nodded eagerly, feeling like he was under her spell. He couldn't resist her, didn't want to resist her. Lilith peeled all of his clothes and led him deeper onto the bed. She pressed him against the mattress, her hands roaming over his body, igniting every nerve ending with electric pleasure. Although it was only in the game, somehow the device made him experience the same thing. A grunt out of his mouth as he lost in the sensation of her touch. She knew just how to make him feel, how to bring him to the brink of ecstasy and hold him there. And then she was kissing him again, her tongue dancing with his, her body pressed so close to his that he could feel the heat emanating from her. He lost himself in her, his mind a haze of pleasure and desire. Her hands moved down his chest. Her fingers traced the lines of his muscles. His heart thundered in his chest, and his breathing grew ragged as she lowered herself onto him, her warmth enveloping him in an instant. My dear, sweet husband, she purred, her hair spilling across his bare chest. His breath caught at her words. This NPC surely knows how to speak endearing things, he thought. He wanted to reply, but his throat felt thick with arousal, and he couldn't speak. So instead, he reached for her hips, pulling her down into his lap. At once, she wrapped her legs around his waist, pressing her breasts against his naked torso. Her pink tips hardened in response, and he couldn't help but gasp when she ran her hands along his back, sliding them between their bodies. As she continued to move her hips against his, Lilith's lips found his neck, and her teeth grazed his skin. Although this was just a VR game, the sensation was so real, so intense. And then her lips were on his, her tongue stroking the length of his. For a moment, he forgot where they were. All he could think about was her, how she was making him feel, how she'd made him forget who he was. All he could do was enjoy the pleasure, the sensation, the bliss of her body moving against his own. Then she removed her tongue from his mouth, and he gasped at the loss of contact. It took all of his willpower not to reach out and touch her, to taste her skin again. Lilith smirked up at him. Do you want more? She teased. Yes, he answered, and without another word, she rose from his lap, opening her bra before kicking off her panties. As she climbed back onto the bed, she pushed him onto his back, straddling his hips. The sight sent him into a daze, his mind unable to comprehend what he was seeing. He stared up at her nude form in awe, watching as she closed the distance between them, and then sank down onto him. At first, it was foreign, like entering a new world. A world of hot and wet flesh and slick muscles, a world of pure pleasure. But then he remembered his role, and his character as the Devil Emperor, and he did not hesitate to take control, to seize the reins of the game. Villain Shage 5, you aren't to an NPC? He reached out, running his hands along her thighs. She arched her back, a low cry escaping her lips, and he smiled, knowing it pleased her. His hands ran along her sides and then cupped her full breasts, squeezing gently. Even through the device, the sensation was so real, so powerful. He could feel each and every muscle, the way they tensed and relaxed. He could hear her breathing, sharp and quick, the sound echoing in his ears. He slid one hand around to the front, his fingers gliding between her plump lips. She moaned and thrust down onto him, and he heard her words through the device. Oh, please, she pleaded. He leaned forward, looking at her breast and feeling her tip harden underneath his tongue. For a while, he played with it, making it even harder under his movement. Satisfied, he released his mouth from it and rubbed his erection in front of her entrance. Then, in one thrust, he pushed his erection inside her, pumping it in and out, and she began to buck her hips again. This time he kneaded her breasts while he filled her with his erection, leaning down to kiss her, his tongue swirling with hers. Lilith's hands wrapped around his shoulders, pulling him closer. He gasped when he felt her warm breath on his earlobe. Then she spoke. "I meant, so strong. It feels so real," she purred. The last one sounded weird to him. It sounded as if he wasn't a real player. But he couldn't think straight right now. He was in the middle of pleasure. All he could think of was his desire. He couldn't resist the urge to move faster, to drive into her harder. She was moaning now, her nails digging into his skin, her body trembling beneath his. He watched as her cheeks flushed a bright red, and he felt his own heart pounding in his chest. Then he felt it too. She climaxed, her inner walls clenching down on him. Her cries echoed within the device, and he lost himself in the sensation, the sounds, the heat radiating between them. For a few moments, he felt nothing but pleasure. Then he came, his body jerking uncontrollably, his orgasm sending jolts of pleasure through him. You bore health point and demonic power are fully charged. When it subsided, he collapsed beside her, panting, and she lay her head on his chest, wrapping an arm around him. Yes, she sighed contentedly, her voice barely above a whisper. This is the first time I've felt this way, especially in a game. I just found out an NPC can go this far, she muttered to herself, her eyes glued to him. Her words struck him like a bolt of lightning. A guess crossed his head, and it made him turn to look at her, his eyes widening in surprise. Wait, does that mean that you aren't an NPC? He asked in uncertainty. A frown on his forehead. Upon his question, Lilith also gave him the same surprised look. Are you a player? She asked, in the same confusion as his. Aye. But before he could say more, his screen suddenly went blank as a loading screen appeared. Please wait for a moment. The loading screen dissolved into the darkened throne room, the only light emanating from the flickering torches that lined the walls. He gasped in shock at the sudden scene change. He was no longer laying down on the bed, but was now seated on the Emperor's throne. A second later, he felt a soft weight settle on his lap. It was Lilith. She was perched on his lap, nestled in his arms, completely naked. He could feel the warmth of her skin against his own, her curves and contours pressing against him. Both of them had no idea how they had ended up in this place. She looked up at him, her gaze filled with equal parts wonder and confusion. What is happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He shook his head, still unable to find his voice. He looked around the throne room, searching for some sort of explanation. But there was nothing to be found. As they sat there in the throne room, still trying to make sense of their sudden appearance in this unfamiliar place, he noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The room, which had been empty just moments ago, was now populated with a small group of people. They were all dressed in clothing that matched the game's medieval fantasy theme, their attire ornate and intricately detailed. Some of them were milling about, murmuring amongst themselves in hushed tones, while others stood off to the side, eyeing him with suspicion and curiosity. But for sure all of them were confused, just like him. Lilia's grip on him tightened as she too noticed the group of people. "Who are they?" she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. He shook his head, still trying to make sense of it all. "I don't know," he muttered, his eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of familiarity. But except that they were all demons, there was none to be found. For sure, this time, he was sure they were all players, not NPCs. Then his eyes fell on one woman who stood out from the rest. She was dressed in a business suit, a stark contrast to the medieval attire of the others, causing her to stand out even more. The woman was slender and broad-shouldered. A cringe was on her friendly face. Her gaze was on him. He glanced at her name. Khafra. "Can you tell me what's going on here?" he demanded, his voice tense and urgent. He was sure that she was the one who had summoned all of them to this place. The low number of players present suggested that the game staff had specifically selected certain individuals, and he couldn't help but wonder what role he was meant to play in all of this. Villain She H6, Sharp-Tongued Siren. Khafra quickly returned to her composure and smiled warmly. "I will," she replied, her voice calm and collected. "But don't you two better get dressed first?" Lilith, who had been on his lap, suddenly realized that he was another player and jumped off him in embarrassment. She covered her breasts with one hand while the other frantically searched for her equipment screen. In a matter of seconds, her clothes reappeared, covering her body. "Sorry about that," she muttered, her face flushed. The same as her, he quickly summoned his equipment screen and changed into his usual outfit, trying to hide his embarrassment. He could feel his heart racing, the adrenaline pumping through his veins. Despite his panic, he was excited to see what all of this was about. As they finished getting dressed, Khafra cleared her throat to expel her embarrassment and started giving greetings to them all. "Welcome, players," she began, her voice more formal now. "I'm glad you could join us today. All of you are the first 8 players who achieved a perfect score at the training ground. So all of you had been chosen to be the villains in this game, Mod. You will be facing off against the heroes, trying to prevent them from completing their quests and saving the world." She gave them a long explanation. He listened intently, his mind already whirring with ideas on how to be the best villain he could be. He knew it would be challenging, but he was determined to succeed. Lilith, on the other hand, looked uncertain. "But why villains?" she asked, her voice soft. "Why can't we be heroes?" Khafra smiled at her kindly. "You can, but that means you can't use this character again," she explained. "You will be teleported to where other players go. While with this character, it's up to you to make the game interesting. You can challenge the heroes and make them fight for their victories." He grinned, feeling the thrill of the game coursing through his veins. He couldn't wait to see what kind of challenges they would face, what kind of powers they would have, and what kind of quests they would take. But then he remembered something. "Wait a minute," he said, turning to Khafra. "Didn't the game developer say that the villain would be driven by advanced AI? Why do we have to play the villains?" Khafra only smiled cryptically. "All will be revealed in due time," she said. "But right now, the most important question is whether you want to accept this role or not." He and Lilith looked at each other, then back at Khafra. They knew that accepting this role would mean taking on significant responsibility, but they were both ready for the challenge. "I accept," he said firmly, a sense of determination filling him. Lilith nodded in agreement. "I accept too." The others thought for a moment, one by one, agreeing to the challenge. But then there was one different player. She crossed her arms over her chest, a frown marring her face. "Wait," she said, her voice sharp. "I didn't sign up for this." He glanced at the player's name, taking note of the bolded words. Lullaby. As she spoke, he studied her appearance. She had long blue hair, which cascaded down her back in soft waves. A pair of gray wings protruded from her back, as well as from top of her head, which he recognized as typical of flying sirens in the game world. Even though sirens were traditionally associated with the ocean, game developers often modified the myth and added wings to these creatures. Unlike the harpy, which had a half-bird body, most games portrayed sirens as humanoid figures with wings. Despite her beauty, there was an air of defiance about Lullaby that made him wary. He could sense that she was not one to back down easily. Khafra turned to Lullaby, acknowledging her question with a nod. "I understand your concerns," she prompted. "May I know why you refuse it?" Lullaby didn't hesitate. "I won't let us do this task for free," she stated boldly, her voice more mature and commanding than the rest of them. He was sure she was much older than him. Actually, he had been thinking the same thing as Lullaby, but he decided to hold his tongue, at least for now. There was no need to rush into things and risk making a bad impression. Besides, he knew if they were going to become the villains in this game, they should have a written agreement with the company. If not, it would be too easy for one of them to leak the information to the public and damage the game developer's reputation. So they were on higher ground than the game developer itself. "Of course, you won't do this for free," Khafra answered smoothly, her voice laced with confidence. "We'll talk about that later. The most important thing is whether you agree or not." She turned her gaze to each of the players, her eyes lingering on Lullaby. Lullaby seemed to weigh her options for a moment, her sharp gaze scanning the room. He could sense her hesitation, but he didn't blame her. This was a big decision, and they needed to consider all the risks and benefits before agreeing. Finally, Lullaby nodded firmly. "I agree," she said, her voice unwavering. Khafra's smile widened, and you could see the relief in her eyes. "Excellent," she said. "I have already checked your data and identity. I know that all of you live in the same city. Therefore, I suggest that we meet at the cyber building in 2 hours to discuss this further." He glanced around the room and saw the other players nodding in agreement. There was a sense of camaraderie in the air, as if they were all united in this new adventure. "Okay," Khafra said, her voice filled with excitement. The others echoed her sentiment, and Khafra's image on the screen flickered before turning blank as the game logged off automatically. Villain She-Shevan, cyber building. He reached up and carefully removed a VR game device from his head. He felt a sense of disorientation wash over him. The world around him suddenly seemed stark and colorless, lacking the vibrant hues and vivid landscapes he had just experienced within the game. He paused for a moment, his hand hovering over the device as he adjusted to the real world once again. The device itself was a sleek and futuristic piece of technology, with a smooth, matte black finish that reflected the dim light of the room. It fit snugly over his head, encasing his skull and ears in a soft, padded shell that blocked out all external sounds and distractions. Removing it was a deliberate and methodical process, one that required precision and care to avoid any damage to the delicate components. With the device and controllers safely stowed on his desk, he leaned back in his chair and ran his fingers through his short, messy hair. The strands were a deep shade of blue, reminiscent of the character he had been playing in the game. Despite the color, his hair was well maintained and neatly trimmed. His eyes were a rich, warm brown, and they glinted with a mixture of satisfaction and curiosity. The walls were adorned with posters and artwork from various video games and movies, lending the space a cozy and welcoming vibe. A small window on the far wall allowed the sunlight to filter in, casting soft shadows across the floor. He was 23 years old and a simple person at heart, with few material possessions and a humble lifestyle that suited him well. He had always been drawn to the world of gaming and fantasy, and he had found a way to turn his passion into a career as an online writer. Despite the sedentary nature of his work, he was in excellent physical shape. He made a point of working out regularly. His physique was lean and toned, with well-defined muscles that hinted at a rigorous training regimen. His eyes gazed at the gaming device on his desk, the black surface glinting in the dim light of his room. The clock on his desk showed 1:04 p.m., the digital numbers glowing brightly against the dark background. His heart was racing with excitement, a broad smirk spreading across his face as he muttered his role in the game. "Devil Emperor," he whispered, the words feeling almost sacred on his tongue. He could hardly believe that he had just played the biggest villain in the game, a role that had been his ultimate dream since he first started playing. The rush of adrenaline and excitement was still coursing through his veins, his body tingling with anticipation. This was the first time he had ever been given the opportunity to play such a pivotal role in the game, and he knew that it was a chance that might never come again. With a deep breath, he reached over and turned off his gaming device, the screen flickering briefly before going black. He then grabbed his phone, quickly searching for the address of the cyber building where he was supposed to meet with the game staff. His fingers flew across the screen, tapping with practiced ease as he scanned through the search results. Once he had the address, he stood up from his chair and grabbed his motorcycle key from his coat pocket before he quickly slipped on his jacket, zipping it up to his chin. He then grabbed his helmet, the black and silver exterior gleaming in the dim light. He made his way to the basement via the elevator, his fingers tapping impatiently against the metal doors as they slowly descended. The apartment and motorcycle were his. They were the result of the prize money he had won from a gaming tournament 2 years ago. It was a time when he had been obsessed with gaming, but now, as an online writer, he was content to simply enjoy the game as it was. Once he reached the basement, he made his way to his sport motorcycle. It was a beast of a machine, capable of taking him to high speed. He swung his leg over the seat and settled in, feeling the comfortable leather beneath him. He revved the engine to life. With a roar, the motorcycle shot out of the basement and into the busy streets of Irvine City. Skyscrapers loomed high above him, their gleaming glass surfaces reflecting the bright sunlight. The sidewalks were crowded with people, all rushing to and fro on their daily business. It was a chaotic and bustling city, one that never slept. Despite the hustle and bustle, he navigated his way through the streets with ease. He had ridden through these streets 1,000 times before, and he knew the best shortcuts and hidden alleys to take to avoid the worst of the traffic. There were no fantastical creatures like elves and dwarves in his real world. Only humans existed, and the city looked just like any other normal modern city. After half an hour, he spotted the tall building from a distance, his heart racing with anticipation as he recognized it as the cyber building. It loomed large and impressive against the city skyline, its windows reflecting the bright sunlight in dazzling patterns. He expertly navigated his motorcycle into a parking space near the entrance and dismounted, taking a moment to smooth out his jacket and put his helmet in the luggage. As he entered the building, he was greeted by the cool air conditioning and the bustling energy of the lobby. The lobby was spacious and airy, with gleaming marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city. People rushed back and forth, talking on their phones or typing on their laptops, all in a hurry to get somewhere. Smoothly, he approached the receptionist, a young woman with bright green eyes and a friendly smile. He cleared his throat nervously. "Excuse me," he said, his voice betraying his nerves. She greeted him warmly. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you?" Her voice was soft and pleasant. "My name is Alan Greyblight. I'm a Hell's Gate player, and Khafra asked me to come here," he said, flashing a grin. "Villain H8, the real Lilith." The receptionist nodded, her eyes scanning over her computer screen. A small smile played at the corners of her lips. "Ah, yes. I see your name on the list, Mr. Greyblight. Welcome to Cyber," she said, her voice pleasant and professional. "You need to go up to the 30th floor. Take the elevator straight ahead and turn left when you get out. The meeting will be held in conference room C." "Thank you," he replied, feeling a sense of relief wash over him, since she understood quickly, although he only mentioned his name in Khafra. He made his way to the elevator. As the elevator doors slid open, Alan took a deep breath and stepped inside. The walls were made of sleek black glass, and the floor was carpeted in a deep red. He pressed the button for the 30th floor, feeling a sense of excitement building within him. He really wanted to know what he should do as the villain of the game. Once he stepped out of the elevator, he was immediately greeted by another receptionist who smiled warmly at him. "Mr. Greyblight, please follow me," she said, gesturing towards a door at the end of the hallway. Alan followed her, his heart pounding with excitement. They entered conference room C, which was empty, except for him. It took a sleek and modern design. The wall on one side of the room was made entirely of glass, offering a breathtaking view of the bustling city below. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and there was a long table in the center of the room. On the table were several VR devices and controllers, neatly arranged and waiting to be used. The receptionist turned to him and said, "You may take self-service at the complimentary corner while waiting." "Thank you," he replied, feeling a sense of gratitude, since it meant he had something to do to kill the time. She left the room, closing the door behind her, and Alan was left alone in the conference room. He approached the corner of the room, where there was a small table filled with snacks and drinks, and decided to make himself a cup of tea to accompany him to write. However, instead of writing or sitting down, he found himself drawn to the window side of the room, where he could see the vast expanse of the city below. Lost in thought, he sipped his tea and gazed out at the endless sea of skyscrapers, each one seemingly reaching for the heavens, trampling down the city and destroy it. He muttered nonsense as he thought about his game role. A smirk appeared on his face. "Maybe I should write a villain theme story and create an evil character for my next book," he muttered again before sipping his tea. 5 minutes later, the sound of the door opening broke through his reverie and made him turn around. His hand lowered his cup, and his gaze quickly caught a beautiful young woman entering the room. She was around 21 years old, with long purple hair that cascaded down her back in soft waves. Her face was sweet and delicate, with full lips and bright, sparkling eyes. She wore a simple, yet elegant short dress with a bit of lace around the hem, giving her a distinct Lolita style. "Please wait here, Miss Featherspell. Miss Khafra will come soon," said the receptionist politely. "Thank you," said the girl before the receptionist left and closed the door. The girl turned to the room, and her gaze quickly caught the only person in that room. A man wearing a simple t-shirt with a black jacket stood near the huge window. He looked older than her a bit, and she found his face was kinda handsome. He had a friendly vibe around him. Their eyes met. She quickly remembered something and couldn't help but feel a flutter in her chest. Her heart was pounding so hard that she could feel the pulse in her temples as she stood frozen in front of him. Before he could say anything, the girl spoke. "The Emperor," her voice was soft but filled with shock. It flew out her mouth just like that. Alan was stunned. This was the first time someone called him by his role in the game, and every nerve in his body was on high alert. In the previous game's throne room, he was the only male character in the game. The game device did not allow players to swap genders to avoid the dreaded catfishing, leaving the players with no choice but to play as they were. In an instant, he recognized her from the expression on her face and the tone of her voice. "Lilith," he said in the same surprise, making sure he wasn't mistaken. He had thought that she would arrive later, along with the others, but here she was, standing before him, all alone. He couldn't believe that they had met up so soon after what had happened in the game. Indeed, it was embarrassing, but he couldn't deny that he enjoyed her seduction and touch. But what surprised him more was her appearance. He didn't expect the real Lilith to be as beautiful as her character in the game. She was too nervous to answer him. Her face was flushed in obvious embarrassment, especially after she seduced him. Even though that only happened in the virtual world, they were strangers. They had never met before, so it was very awkward. Indeed, Vergame erotica was a thing nowadays, but the player usually did that with NPCs, not with other players. That was why they both assumed that they were NPCs at each other. She fought her will to run. She didn't want to be there alone with him after what happened. She even could imagine how he would laugh at her and mention how bold she was in the game or how stupid she was thinking that he was an NPC. Villain Chach 9. The Devil Emperor is an old man. "I'm so sorry," she stuttered, finally opening her voice after her hard inner battle. "I thought you were an NPC. I didn't mean to. Died. Mel, you know." Her words trailed off into awkward silence, and she looked away, her hands fidgeting nervously. He couldn't help but notice the way her face turned a deeper shade of red with each passing second, so he tried to break the tension with a reassuring smile. "Hey, don't worry about it," he said, his voice soft and reassuring. "We both made a mistake, but it's all good. Why don't you take a seat?" With a sweeping gesture, he motioned to a nearby seat. "And if you're hungry," he added, "there are some snacks over there." He pointed to a small table in the corner of the room. After a moment of hesitation, she finally mustered the courage to take a step forward. With a small nod, she decided to forego the complimentary corner and take a seat instead. But her nervousness was still evident on her face. As she settled into her seat, Alan couldn't help but notice the awkward tension between them. He could sense her discomfort, and he knew that he needed to do something to break the ice. Without a word, he sat beside her and placed his cup on the table. Taking a deep breath, he turned to face her, his voice soft and reassuring. "I'm Alan," he said, extending his hand. "Nice to meet you." For a moment, she hesitated, her eyes flickering uncertainty between his face and his outstretched hand. But after a moment of consideration, she finally reached out and took his hand in hers. "Vivian," she introduced herself, her voice barely above a whisper. Alan withdrew his hand and leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Vivian's face. He couldn't help but notice the way her hands trembled slightly when they touched. She doesn't look like a gamer, he thought to himself. He had met several female gamers before, from the wannabe gamer girls who were only interested in hanging out with the boys, to the real deal who knew their way around a game controller. But Vivian was different. There was something about her that intrigued him, something that he couldn't quite put his finger on. Alan's curiosity was piqued, and he couldn't help but wonder if Vivian was as new to VR gaming as she appeared. Yet her game score said another thing. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to broach the subject without sounding rude or offensive. But then, with a small smile, he decided to change his approach. "Is this your first time playing this type of VR game?" he asked, his tone gentle and curious. For a moment, Vivian hesitated, her eyes flickering uncertainly. But then, with a deep breath, she shook her head. "This is actually my second time playing VR MMORPG," she admitted. His eyes studied her face for a moment before he spoke again. "What game did you play before?" he asked, his voice filled with excitement. Vivian hesitated for a moment, unsure if she was ready to share her gaming history with a stranger. But then, with a small smile, she decided to take the risk. "I used to play a lot of the Quest for the Dragon's Treasure," she admitted. "I was really into the fantasy aspect of it, and I loved exploring all the different worlds and characters." Alan's face broke into a grin. "No way, me too," he exclaimed, his eyes shining with excitement. "I used to spend hours raiding with my guild, trying to level up and get the best gear. It was so much fun." For the next few minutes, they talked about their favorite game memories, swapping stories and strategies. As they spoke, the tension between them began to fade, and Vivian found herself relaxing in Alan's company. But then, just as they were really getting into the conversation, the door to the meeting room burst open, and two other girls walked in. The first girl who walked in was 23 years old, with long blonde hair that cascaded down her back in soft waves. Her hazelnut eyes sparkled with mischief as she sauntered into the room, her movements confident and self-assured. She wore a matching crop top and shorts that showed off her toned abs and long, lean legs. Her skin was bronzed and glowing, and she exuded an energy that was both playful and alluring. The second girl was also 23 years old, with pink hair that fell in loose waves around her shoulders. Her hair was styled in a soft, feminine manner, with the ends slightly curled for added bounce and volume. She wore a simple yet elegant dress that clung to her curves in all the right places, accentuating her slender figure and delicate features. Her eyes were a deep, rich brown, and they sparkled with a warmth and kindness that was immediately disarming. As the two new girls entered the room, their eyes were immediately drawn to Alan and Vivian, who were in the midst of a conversation about their shared love of video games. The girls looked at him for a few moments, their gazes intense and curious. "Ha, thank God, the Devil Emperor isn't an old man," the pink-haired girl said in relief, her voice carrying a hint of laughter. "Yeah, I also thought he was a perverted old man," the blonde girl chimed in, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "But it seems his deep voice makes him sound older than he actually is." Alan forced a smile, though inwardly he was annoyed. He had always been self-conscious about his voice, which he felt made him sound much older than his actual age. But he knew better than to let his insecurities show, especially in front of these new girls. "Sorry for having a voice like an old man," he said, trying to sound lighthearted. Vivian held back a giggle, sensing his discomfort. Villain Shage 10, Daddy Material. Both of the girls made their way to the seats at the other end of the table, sitting down with a soft rustle of fabric. "It's a good thing, you know. You are a good source of daddy material," blonde girl said bluntly with a shrug. He held his cringe. Daddy material? I'm not married yet, he thought. But yeah, he held his tongue. The pink-haired girl spoke up next, her voice as bright as her hair. "Are you a couple? I mean, we all saw what happened in the throne room." Alan and Vivian both quickly denied the accusation, their faces flushing with embarrassment. "No, we aren't," Vivian said, her voice soft and apologetic. "It was just a misunderstanding," Alan added, hoping to quell any further inquiries. "I see. So it was also your first time," the pink-haired girl said, her eyes widening with interest. "Is it your fetish?" she asked again. But before Alan and Vivian answered, the blonde girl poked her friend with her elbow, a warning that she had asked a sensitive thing. "Sorry, we didn't introduce ourselves earlier," the blonde girl said, offering her hand to Alan. "I'm Bella, and this is Alice." She gestured to her friend. "It's nice to meet you both," Alan said, once again introducing himself. "I'm Alan." "And I'm Vivian," Vivian chimed in, trying to lighten the mood a little. The group settled into a more comfortable conversation, discussing their previous experience in the new game. The meeting room was abuzz with activity as the conversation between Alan, Vivian, Bella, and Alice continued to flow smoothly. However, their chat was soon interrupted by the arrival of 4 more girls who sauntered into the room with an air of confidence and poise. The first of the new arrivals was a 25-year-old black-haired beauty named Larissa. Her toned body exuded strength and confidence, and she moved with a fluid grace that was mesmerizing to watch. Alan couldn't help but notice the way her eyes sparkled with intelligence and wit, and he found himself drawn to her magnetic energy. The other 2 girls who entered the room with Larissa were a mother and daughter duo. The mother, she, was a stunning woman with long, flowing hair that glimmered like strands of gold in the light. Her expensive-looking clothes draped elegantly over her lithe figure, and she carried herself with the grace and poise of a queen. Her daughter, Zoe, was about 18 years old, with soft brown hair that framed her delicate features. Her short hair was styled in a chic, modern cut that suited her youthful energy and playful spirit. The last one was a 24-year-old girl with red medium hair and brown eyes who had a lively and outgoing personality. She looked confident, passionate, and not afraid to stand out from the crowd. Her brown eyes indicated warmth, sincerity, and grounded nature. Her name was Jane. As Larissa, Jane, Shay, and Zoe settled into their seats, before they could make any real conversation, except introduce their name, another woman entered the room. She was in her 30s, with black hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, and she wore a sharp business suit that accentuated her lithe figure. A name tag on her lapel revealed her name to be Kafra, and it was clear from her confident demeanor that she was one of the top game staff members. "Hello, everyone," Kafra said as she approached the conference table. "I apologize for the delay. Are you all ready for this meeting? I have a lot to explain, and I don't want to keep you waiting any longer." The group nodded in unison, their curiosity piqued. They were all eager to learn more about their roles. "Excellent," Kafra said with a smile. "First things first, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Kafra, and I am one of the top game staff members. I am here to guide you through this game and to help you achieve your goals." Kafra began to explain the intricacies of the game. The group listened intently. She explained that the game developer had decided to use a real player instead of AI to portray the villain character in the game. The villain of this game is our highest selling point, Kafra explained. We needed a real thrill that would make the players compete to defeat the villains. Our research team tried this on our advanced AI, but it didn't work. Even though we could create an intelligent villain, there was nothing that would spur the players to be the best. Pay to win would be something that would be alluring for the players, which meant it would give the game company more money. With AI, they were just bland villain characters with scripted sentences and actions. She mentioned all the reasons bluntly. So, to provide a real gaming experience, we decided to use a real player and make them the villain in this game. Kafra continued. And out of all the players you were selected, your role was not only determined by your score at the training ground, but also by your track record in the past. Kafra read out their track records one by one, and the group was stunned. Most of them had extensive gaming experience, even though their current jobs had nothing to do with games. Even Shia, the beautiful mother, had previous gaming experience. You see, we needed players who could truly embody the role of the villain and challenge the other players to be their best, Kafra explained. And based on your track records, we believe that you are the perfect candidate for this role. As soon as Kafra finished her explanation, the room fell silent. It was Shea who broke the silence, her voice confident, as she asked about their compensation. Since this is more like a job and all we're going to do is for the company's gain, we should also be getting something out of this, right? She questioned. Kafra nodded her head, understanding that the group was not just in this for the thrill of the game. She then went on to explain the payment plan, which consisted of a share of the sales of certain in-game items. The job seemed like a win-win situation for both parties. The company got the thrill they needed for their game, while they got the monetary compensation they deserved. Kafra continued to explain their duties. They had to participate in the war events at least 5 times a week, and if the Devil Emperor wasn't online within a week, they would replace him, while the others had a month. As for their contracts, Kafra explained that they would be renewed every year, depending on the success of the game. No, don't forget to leave review and vote. The contract. Villain Shi A11. The contract. After Kafra finished explaining the payment and their duties, Alan raised a valid concern. What if our friends ask us to join the hunt with them? If they know we are playing the game, but continue to refuse their requests, they will be suspicious of us. Kafra smiled. Don't worry about that, Alan. All of you have the demon's disguise skill. With that skill, you can imitate human characters, but you only have one disguise. During the disguise, not only your appearance, but your skills will follow a certain class. Meanwhile, your demonic skills will be locked. This was something they didn't expect. With the demon's disguise skill, they could blend in with the rest of the players without arousing any suspicion. I understand. It's like being an undercover agent, in a way, Jane said with a smirk. Kafra nodded approvingly. Yes, you could say that. And it's important that you treat it like a job. You'll be representing our company, after all. Menon, Kafra continued. However, I must warn you all to cover up your identities, as it might trigger hatred against you in the real world. We don't want any unnecessary attention on you. As for your character, you will play like normal players and level up like the others. Of course, the company will provide a certain place to help your leveling, but for some places, you will still have to share with others. This will make the game more realistic since the players could encounter the villains anywhere, not just during events. Larissa raised her hand. What if we encounter someone who recognizes us? Kafra nodded. That is a possibility, but it will be better if you try to stay anonymous as much as possible. The group listened intently to Kafra's instructions, trying to memorize everything. This was a big responsibility, and they didn't want to mess it up. They were excited about this opportunity, but at the same time, they were nervous about the consequences. Kafra noticed their anxious faces and reassured them. Don't worry, you guys were selected because we believe in your skills and your ability to handle this role. We will provide you with all the necessary support and training. Just focus on your duties and have fun with the game. After that long explanation, Kafra gave them the contract and they signed it. They checked it for a while and signed it. Once it was done and the documents were in Kafra's hands again, she began discussing their in-game requests. Alan's heart sank as he remembered the ridiculous attributes he had entered. He could feel the judgmental eyes of the other players on him. Just as he was about to protest, Kafra interrupted with surprising news. "Alan, the girls have already agreed to your request," she said calmly. "Huh?" His confusion was clear on his face. Alan's eyes widened in shock. He hadn't expected that at all. He looked at the girls, who seemed embarrassed and a little uncomfortable. "Minty," Kafra continued. "However, I need your approval for their requests as well." The girls' faces turned pale at the mention of their requests. Zoe spoke up. "Can't we discuss this more privately?" Kafra looked around at the small group. "This is already private, isn't it? After all, you have all seen each other's requests and agreed to them." Without further ado, Kafra began to list each player's request. The first name to roll off her tongue was Larissa's, and as soon as she mentioned her name, the atmosphere grew tense. Larissa was playing a vampire queen in the game. Her request was simple. She wanted to suck Alan's blood every time they had sex. Alan's eyes widened at the request, and he struggled to maintain his composure. The other girls, however, glanced at Larissa with a mixture of shock and discomfort. Larissa, in turn, felt her face flush with embarrassment as she awkwardly covered her face with her hands. "I thought it was just a demo," Larissa said in a defensive tone, "so I wanted to try my favorite scene from a vampire story." Alan swallowed hard, his mind racing as he tried to process. After all, he couldn't really judge Larissa's request, considering that his own was equally absurd. But before he could dwell on this thought for too long, Kafra spoke up again, this time addressing a request from Vivian. Alan's jaw dropped as Kafra read out the request. Vivian had asked if she could seduce him every time they had sex, citing her character as a succubus as the reason why it would be fitting. He turned to look at Vivian, who was sitting right next to him, as well as the other players. The room was silent once again. Everyone's eyes locked on Vivian. Vivian sat there with her red face. "It's just a character trait," she sniffled, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought it suited her well." Then Kafra continued again. Kafra's voice was barely above a whisper as she read out the next request. "Bella's request is, she wants Alan to act like a daddy while they're intimate, or during gameplay. She is the fox demon," she said, her eyes flickering to Bella for a moment before returning to her notes. Alice's face contorted in disgust, and she turned to look at Bella with a look of disbelief on her face. But Bella, in contrast, simply smiled smugly, as if she had known that her request would raise eyebrows. "I told you he was good daddy material," Bella said casually, her tone laced with amusement. "So, I'll use it well." Alan's face burned with embarrassment as he tried to wrap his mind around Bella's request. The idea of acting like a daddy was completely foreign to him, but he was also curious about it. As Kafra continued to read out the requests, Alan couldn't help but feel his heart rate quickening with every passing moment. It seemed like each request was more outrageous than the last, and he couldn't help but wonder what he had gotten himself into. Note: don't forget to click vote and leave re.